Welcome to TSG Live Model Railroading, a program to share ideas and ask fellow modelers about their approach to the hobby. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be inspired.
All right, and welcome to TSG Live Model Railroading. Here I am. Sorry we're running a minute late here. I'm John, your host, and I'll be joined here with our special guest in just a moment. It's 9:06 on Saturday morning, December 18th. It's a very cold morning where I live in the Bay Area, and we're here to talk about operations. So I'm going to bring in our guest here, but I want to give a little introduction. Seth Neumann has been operating for a long time, and he really likes it. He goes all over the country to operate. He also, the name might sound familiar because he's a co-author of this book from the Operations SIG, and I've been meaning to get him to autograph it, but I think I borrowed this book from someone, and I can't remember who I borrowed it from, and I don't want to get autographs for people that maybe they don't know. Anyway, let's bring Seth on and get started in earnest. Well, good morning, Seth.
Well, good morning, John. Pleasure to be here in the frosty South San Jose studios of TSG.
Yeah, we're actually coming to you live from the TSG Intergalactic Headquarters and the Intergalactic Headquarters satellite, which is where Seth is.
And you thought the James Webb Telescope was the big astronomical story this week.
Oh, speaking of James Lake, what's that thing behind you there? Oh, no, I'm sorry. That'll only be funny to us. I want to welcome you, Seth. You've been on the channel before. I always learn a lot when you're on, so thanks for coming. And yeah, we're going to talk about operations today. And unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to preview the presentation, so I don't want to bore people with a bunch of introductory stuff that's probably covered in your presentation. But this is a great chance for everybody watching who's interested in ops, or maybe they heard about it but just want to learn more, or maybe they're shy and are afraid to ask someone to go operate, or whatever. And we're going to talk about all that stuff. So anyway, sir, what would you like to say about operations?
Me? Well, operations is the book. The book is excellent. OPSIG, and let me plug OPSIG for those of you. Well, I guess it's not in the frame, but I'm wearing an OPSIG shirt, so I have the swag. I might even have the hat. I know I've got the shirt. So I've been there, done that, and I have the shirt anyway. That's most of the way. But the Operations Special Interest Group, or OPSIG, www.opsig.org, is a great resource for information, for finding out about open events. So if you want to, a quick connection to the community, that certainly works. Or, certainly communicating with John or myself through TSG, we'll try and hook you up with somebody who's doing operations in your local area. But it's, in many ways, it's really the social aspect of building a layout. Once you've built it, you'd like to run it. And many owners, including myself, I think, probably get a lot of their satisfaction around their layout from watching it come to life when a bunch of people who are serious about trying to operate the model railroad as a model of a real transportation system come in and take on the various roles of train crews, dispatchers, yard masters, and all the other modelable jobs on the railroad. It's great fun. A few hours, learn something about the railroad the owner is modeling, and hang out with a bunch of like-minded people. And many of my best friends after 20-25 years of active participation in operations are fellow operators and people I've met through the hobby. So I find it pretty rewarding for a lot of reasons that aren't directly connected to model railroading.
Yeah, one of the things I want to mention right off the top here, a pro tip for everybody watching. This is the guy you want to talk to or contact if you live somewhere and you're interested in finding an operating group. He knows all of them, or most of them, or he knows someone who can put you in touch with someone, So this would be a great place to ask questions or even, make contact this way, because you've been all over the world, really, Seth, right? In terms
Well, I have had the opportunity to operate on, I guess, 2 continents anyway. So
I'm making it sound like some big thing. Like, yes, he's operated in Russia, Italy, and Japan. It's like, well, Australia.
Australia, yeah. But one of the cool things about the hobby is, there's people involved in even if you limit it to just North American outline railroading, all over the world. And those people participate in many of the groups and forums, and some of the great podcasts like TSG's, and it's you get to know these people on these lists and in the endless Zoom meetings we've had the last couple of years. So there are plenty of opportunities to reach out and make connections, and people. Model railroaders are almost always happy to host, any visitor who comes and, asks politely. And very often, you can leverage that into an operating invitation. So, I was very fortunate to be able to tap into, 2 groups in trip we took to Australia a couple of years ago, and Sydney area and the Melbourne area. The quality of the modeling and the quality of the operations was extremely good. If I had considered those to be operating meets in North America, they would have been up there with the best. So there's great operations almost anywhere you look.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, with that. Maybe we should think about going to the presentation then, because you have something that you've cooked up for us, right?
Well, I just have a couple of notes, and they're tech slides, and we'll talk through it. So it'd be nice to have some videos and a little more graphics, but we'll just go with what I've got now. So where on this control panel is the share button?
Oh, if you look down at the bottom, there should be a little it's just like Zoom. There's a little bunch of stuff there: mute, stop, cam mic, share, etc.
Okay, I see. At the bottom. Oh, that's the plus. No, that looks like it's.
Share has a plus on it. Yeah.
All right, let's take a look.
It's like a monitor with a.
Okay, yeah. So do I share screen or share slides?
If you want to share the PowerPoint presentation as an upload, you can hit share slides, and it'll ask you what presentation you want to upload. And then it'll just take a minute for it to upload, and then I have control. You'll have to tell me when you want to.
All right,
when you want to advance the slides. Pretty straightforward, though.
It says upload file, and I'm sorry, John. I should have been a little better prepared. But let's see if we can find this.
If you want to share it as share screen, that's fine too. You just won't be able to see us talking. Which might be a bonus, actually.
Well, hold on a moment here. Okay, so it's uploading, and you'll walk me through what we're doing here.
Generally, what happens with StreamYard is once it's fully uploaded, it'll give me a screen here down below, which just popped up, and then I can bring it up. I can bring it up right here. There we go. And then you just need to let me know when you're ready to advance the slides, and I can do it from here.
Oh, okay, great. All right. Now, can I get this back to a full screen so I can see what I'm doing? Because I've now got a tiny little thing in here. Well, you know what? I know what the slide says. Now, it seems to have a... did that advance it for you also?
It did, yes.
Well, how about that? All right.
Now, why is it working like that today? I was having to advance it for someone last week when we did this. Technical
I have
stuff.
no idea. How do I make this look larger? Because I can barely read it now.
I wish I could tell you. I'm not looking at your computer screen right now, Seth.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
Yeah. Did you navigate back to StreamYard and now you can see it?
Yeah, no, I'm up
side?
here and I'm now seeing you in the corner and me below you and the slide and a comment from Andy Ambrose. And OPSIG is a great value because you can you basically sign up for the content without a physical magazine, and it's I think $20 a year or something, and they provide a wonderful magazine quarterly, and Eric Smith, who's the media guy, and he may be one of the directors also. At this point, is every other week usually has some kind of live presentation with great chat. So again, the point is there's lots of knowledgeable people, happy to discuss issues and new ideas they've seen, and that's an awful lot of the fun. So I guess the place to start is, what is operations? And one way of thinking about it is it's modeling the transportation function of a real railroad. So, what does a railroad do? It picks up railroad cars full of stuff from a shipper and hauls them off to a rail yard and sorts them into trains. It moves the trains over the road, probably to a distant yard. Might be a unit train also, and then arranges to get the cars delivered to the consignee, and then picks up the empties when they're done, and rinse and repeat. Another way of thinking about it, as a practical matter, you're a layout owner and you'd like to operate. So what's operations? Well, it's modeling the jobs of the railroad, right? Or at least the ones we want to do. I mean, most of us don't want to do too much paperwork and clerking, although I have a clerk job on my layout, and it's almost always one of the first to go. So, a lot of people do enjoy kind of, pulling the strings and managing the railroad. Not that I live in Silicon Valley full of a lot of geeky control freaks. John and I don't know anyone like that in our local.
Yeah, I don't know anybody like that.
But, again, selective compression is important. There's a lot of players to make the railroad move. We don't model all of them. So you kind of pick and choose the ones you want. And when you're designing your operation scheme, and perhaps, going all the way back to layout design, you may be thinking about the jobs you want to model, and that will inform the design. And, you may find that, for example, in my yard, there was no dedicated yard switcher job. So, under the rules that existed on the Southern Pacific and Western Pacific, which are the railroads that I model anywhere from the 30s onward, if there was no dedicated yard switcher, there was no yardmaster. So we don't have one, but we do have a clerk, and the clerk keeps track of what's in the yard and hands out work to the crews.
I want to mention something, Seth, before you continue. For anyone who's interested, and this could inform this conversation. Oh, you're muted suddenly. This is strange. I'm going to assume. Is there something wrong with my computer? Or is there something wrong with Seth's computer? Can someone in the chat please type in, let us know if they're hearing Seth still? Because I lost his audio. And I don't think it's something that I did. Can't hear Seth, they're saying. Yeah, is your battery dead on your headset, mate? Well, if your battery's dead, you wouldn't be able to hear me. That's odd. You're not muted on StreamYard. Huh. Yeah, people aren't able to hear you, Seth. You can't hear me? Well, let me check our private comment. Boy, we're having all kinds of interesting issues this time. Seth, can you go into that private chat window and tell me if you're able to hear me? If you are, yeah, you just advance the slide, but it's not. I can't hear you. Can you hear me, Seth? Nod your head if you can hear me. I get the impression he's not able to hear me. Okay, everybody, please stand by for just a moment. We're going to see if we can figure out what's going on. I apologize for this. Oh, I think he's going to try to fix the headset again. Anyway, the reason why we started late today was because Seth had an issue with his headset pairing with his computer, and it sounds like he's able to hear me now. You want to try to talk a little, Seth, and see if we can hear you?
Yes. Yeah. Where did
okay.
we lose me?
Yeah, you're back. I wanted to interject something because you were talking about what you model on your railroad. And this is something that I think can give some perspective for anybody who watches this later. You can watch actually 3 videos on this channel that I did with Seth. One was the layout tour of his layout, which will inform you about, he's talking about WP and UP, or, that'll show you what he's talking about on his layout. We also did basically an introduction to operations on Seth's layout, which you can also find if you just search for his name, which is convenient. I'll put it into the chat in just a minute because it may be spelled in a way that you don't think it's spelled. And then the other one was a Model Railroading 101 video that's all about operations. And I'm sure we're going to cover some of the same stuff on this program, but on this program, you get to ask questions. So I just wanted to put that out there, Seth, because I think it'll give people a lot more context to what you're talking about if they go and watch those videos later on. So.
Yeah, thank you. And please do interject. Otherwise, we'll just get into droning slides, and that's probably not the most exciting content. I mean, I love to hear myself talk, but even for me, that'd be a lot.
Well, if you put yourself to sleep, we'll know there's a problem.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I do want to mention also that one of the things that we're way too loose on here. One of the things that I learned when we did the Model Railroading 101 video, and you alluded to this just a moment ago, which was one of the things that Model Railroading always incorporates, and it doesn't matter, well, let's say 99% of the time, because there may be some layouts that are actually done to scale with no compression, but most layouts and most model railroaders deal with compression. And one of the things that kind of was a takeaway for me during one of our conversations was that we compress the jobs that we don't like out of the railroad. And I thought that was a very interesting concept that you just brought up a minute ago. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't really internalize. Do you know what I mean? Like they're just like, oh, well, of course there's no clerks. That's not fun. Right? So anyway, I just wanted to comment on that because I think it's an interesting concept of compressing jobs out, the boring stuff out. So anyway, sir.
Absolutely. Most model railroads, have probably too much compression, maybe one train length between towns, and you end up, switching with your locomotive in one town and the caboose in the next town. So it's nice to have, certainly a full train length between towns, and ideally 2 or 3 so that there's a little more of a feeling of going somewhere. But there are a few layouts that have been able to, have 5 or 6, and unless the operating scheme is particularly interesting and challenging, La Mesa's, the La Mesa Club's Tehachapi Pass layout, immediately comes to mind. It gets boring. You want to compress some of that out. Yeah, I left the last town. I did my work. I'm running. I'm still running. Okay, are we going to get there, Daddy? When are we going to get there?
Are we there
John's
yet?
looking at me, make him stop.
Yeah. Well, I mean, La Mesa, you can actually do that because they have long runs in between their stations.
Right, and in La Mesa, I mean, it actually really supports an important operational function of their operating scheme, and we're not really going to talk that much about dispatching and train control here, but suffice it to say, they do a pretty serious job of trying to replicate what it was like to run under timetable and train order rules, which requires a fair amount of communication, and it's time consuming. So in order to prepare orders and copy them to trains that may be approaching several different stations along a fairly long layout, it takes a while to do that communication. It takes a while for things to develop, and it's important to do that. Now there are some excellent layouts around the country that do this with a little less space between towns, but you know, if you get much more than 3 trains between towns, you really have to think about what you're doing. Tony Custer's written extensively about this. Tony's got a very nice layout that was designed for timetable and train order. And again, the long runs between switching opportunities are a big part of making that work. So anyway, let's see here. Now, here we go.
There you go.
Different control panels. So StreamYard's a little new to me. So
Okay. We'll get through it together.
Yeah, so I would think of operations as probably 3 main groups of things that I'm just putting together for convenience, and kind of give you an idea of the spectrum, and then we'll take a little deeper dive into car forwarding. But the first idea is car forwarding, which is the concept of getting cars where they need to go. So car cards and waybills are one approach. There are switch lists approach, and there's a number of things. So we'll dive into that. So very often people will say, well, do you use car cards or switch lists? And what they're really talking about is the mechanism that the various crews that touch the cars, the locals and the yard crews and so forth, use to understand where the cars are going. The second area is once you've gotten the cars back into the yards, locals run out there, collected a bunch of cars from industries, and now these cars need to go somewhere. Well, really all the local cared about was, is this car at an industry ready to be moved? Have they finished loading it or unloading it if they had received an inbound load? And do I need to take it back to the yard? And generally a local runs out from a yard and does some work and comes back. We'll cover this a little bit down the line, or it may run from one yard to another. But in any case, the real question is, does this car come with me or not? And then the yard assembles it and says, well, now where is it going? Well, my layout, for example, is set in the Bay Area. So there's 2 possible places it could go. Essentially to Roseville, which is the major classification yard near Sacramento, from where it could go north up to Seattle or Portland, and perhaps on to Canada. Or does it go east over the Sierra to Reno and then Salt Lake City, Omaha, and so forth? And the other possible place it could go would be Southern California. There was still a little traffic on the coastline, and we didn't invent any new coastline traffic on my layout, but we chose to model more of it than the northern traffic proportionally. So it feels like there's roughly equal amounts of traffic going out to Roseville and going down to West Colton, which is east of Los Angeles. In the real world, it was probably 10-1 Roseville to Los Angeles, but it gives us a little more operating flexibility to do it that way. So, again, we can, this is selective compression. We're modeling real stuff, but we're maybe tweaking the emphasis a little bit.
I
Anyway,
I like the idea, Seth, that by having some flexibility. And I think people could refer to that as a proto freelance approach to operations. You can add a lot of operational interest. And one of the really cool, I think, layouts that is a proto freelance that has a ton of operations in a small space would be Tony Thompson's Santa Rosalia branch, where he modeled SP, but it's in a real place, right? Central Coast. But I think most of what's there is fictional, but there's a lot of it. And I don't know. It's just something I think for people to consider when they're coming up with operation schemes, for example, to add that operational interest. And I think depending how hardcore you want to be, it's okay to add stuff that didn't exist, or to put Lehigh cement, right, in a place where it didn't exist in order to make it relevant to your layout, like you did with Lehigh. So that's
absolutely. I mean, and Tony's, and you did a video on Tony's, I believe. So,
yeah,
longtime viewers have seen it, and the rest of you may want to search. But there were a series of branch lines that ran off of the coast, generally in the area south of San Luis Obispo. And Byron Henderson, who was on a couple of weeks ago, modeled Cayama, which is another similar area. And, pretty much every one of these little mountain range and valleys that ran out to the ocean, which, in Southern California, they're probably, on 20-mile, 30-mile centers, at one time or another had a little railroad there, and a number of them became branches. So what Tony did is just collected some interesting features from a couple of them and made, kind of the, archetypal SP Coast branch. And, it's a lot of fun, very intense switching. So he's able to get, quite a bit of operation in a small space. And, so some clever use of the intervening coast mountain range to provide some visual separation between two towns, one of which is on the main line and mostly handles interchange, but does have a couple of packing houses because, people were growing food in the area. And then another one further out towards the coast. So, there are a whole bunch of things. And, by, like John says, playing with the air a little bit and selecting features, you could plausibly include a small port, by post-World War II, when Tony's modeling the coast lumber trade is probably pretty much gone. But, you could certainly keep an older industry on life support to provide a little more play value. I've got a couple of those on my layout, and even strict prototypers generally feel, keeping an industry alive for a while is okay, so we kind of had the day of the living dead shippers,
Something else that I think to consider when it comes to an operating scheme is, even if you're doing a straight freelance operation, you can take a lot of prototype operations and stick that in there. So it's like, well, this is realistic. It's a freelance railroad, but it's doing realistic things, which I think is the whole point of model railroad operations in the first place, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I can think of several in the Bay Area. Just a month or two ago, last month, I had the opportunity to run on Bill Darnaby's Maumee route. And this is, a line that runs kind of through Ohio and I guess Indiana. And, lots of interchange, very typical Midwestern operation, a lot of, interesting operating features. And, while that railroad didn't really exist, at least in anything like the form that Bill models, it's, a wonderful challenge. I love to run it, don't live near there, so I don't get to do it often enough. And, I always learn something. It's not, you can never walk, or at least I can never come home from one of those sessions and go, boy, I killed that. I know everything there is to know. It's like every time something happens that humbles me. So, there's more to learn, and it's a lot of fun. Anyway, so wrapping up the dispatching thought, this idea of train control, and it involves the dispatcher and what's sometimes called the chief dispatcher, or in modern terms, the corridor manager, is managing, when the trains move from major yard to major yard, what the routing is, trying to deal with special movements. You may have priority train, for example, in the modern era might be a hot double stack train, coming from a port and delivering containers of high value seasonal merchandise. That actually used to happen. In a timely manner. We had perishable trains, and certainly in the transition era, fruit that would spoil if it didn't get where it was going, first class passenger trains, and some really unique and interesting special movements, which add a lot of character to the railroad and make that railroad's operations unique. And then, there's the different dispatching technologies over the years. We talked a little about timetable and train order. Many of you of course, are familiar with signal layouts that are dispatched on signal indication, generally referred to as CTC, or centralized traffic control. And then, for lighter density operations in the modern era, a lot of radio, direct traffic control, track warrant control, occupancy control, if you're Canadian, is similar to track warrants. So that's a big area, and that's something I personally am involved in a lot, although it gets fairly technical. And
oh, we lost your audio again. We lost your audio again, Seth. I don't know if you can hear me, but we've lost your audio again. It seems like his headset must be timing out or something, which is a little strange, but yes. Anyway, until he gets his, he's repairing. See how he's pushing it on the side? He's having to repair the, are you back? Oh, you can hear me, but I can't hear you. Anyway, I'll talk for a minute while Seth gets his headset repaired. It's funny how that is. I'm saying repaired.
Is this any better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Did you switch to your computer? Of course, I can hear everything else in the background too.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can hear you now.
Is the audio quality okay? I think we're just having problems with that headset.
I think it'll work, Seth. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's better with the headset, but if this is all we have, this is what we can do. This is what we'll do.
Yeah. I'd rather. I'm sorry. So where did I drop out?
I think you were about to advance the slide.
Okay.
That's what it seemed like to me.
So we were talking about, I was just trying to close off the idea of dispatching. There's another area of ops that really some technological improvements have come up in the last couple of years with the latest generation of sound decoders and some very clever folks over at Iowa Scaled who have released something called the Proto Throttle. Now, it's a little spendy, but the combination of some new decoder features and this throttle, which bears more than a passing resemblance to a control stand in a diesel. Thanks, Shane. The throttle allows you to set up the locomotive so they have something that feels like real acceleration and deceleration, and they respond appropriately to the weight of the train behind them. So this really gives the engineer a much more prototypical experience. And I have to say, I first encountered this on layouts belonging to railroaders, people who are professional, go to work for the, big rolling railroad every day, mostly as engineers. And, their feeling was, using your typical DCC cab, even though they're pretty nice, is more like a slot car controller than anything they experience in their professional life. And a lot of these guys have gone off and fully equipped their layouts with these throttles because they feel it adds that much more to the operation. And, certainly on a railroad with long runs, is that any better, John?
Yep.
The thing is sort of cutting me off a little bit with the window. Sorry, getting used to the tool, folks. And if you've got long runs, again, something like La Mesa Club's, 5 long train lengths between sidings, working heavy mountain grades, this sort of thing, I think, adds to the experience just dramatically. So that's something we're going to see more of as we get better at it and technology improves.
Hey Seth, when you go to advance the slide, do you have a headphone jack on your computer? If I bring you a set of headphones you can use?
I believe I do, sure.
Okay, I'm going to bring over, or maybe we can get our top secret producer to bring over a set of headphones to you, because people are complaining that there's some feedback or echo coming through your speakers, which is a common
I'm sure
thing.
there is. Yeah, because I need to leave that up to hear you. All right, we'll tell you what, bring some tin cans over and we'll try that.
Yeah, hopefully she's still with us.
Okay.
Hang on a second. Anyway, please proceed, sir. You can proceed to the. There we go.
Okay, so these formats were done automatically by the latest PowerPoint. These are not horrible. Informal systems. So, how do you decide which cars to move? Let's assume you've got a local, and your instructions are something like proceed from the yard at Anna and work the towns of Bess, Clara, and Dora, and thanks, Sid. And bear with me 1 second as we jack in.
I want to point out now, this is for a sound check, but I also want to point out how official Seth looks now with the big headphones.
I do.
You look like you really know what you're talking about now with glasses and headphones. That's pretty slick, man.
All right. Now, let's see.
Hopefully this will correctly address that echo problem too. So this is the advantage of having a top secret producer at the intergalactic headquarters who can run around and grab stuff.
All right.
Anyway.
So, whoops, hang on. Does this have a microphone or is this just headset only?
It's just headphones for
you to listen.
So, yeah.
But you can still hear me, right?
Yes, sir. You can still hear you. It's just to get rid of the echo, because what happens sometimes is the computer that you're listening to me on gets a loop because the speakers and the microphone, like the microphone picks up what the speakers are projecting. If you put headphones on, now the microphone can no longer hear that. So it's no longer creating a feedback loop. So,
okay, so my mic seems to be here.
Yes.
But I'm still hearing through the speaker and not through the cans.
Oh, you might need to select that in your control panel.
Okay.
Or actually, sorry, try selecting it in StreamYard. There should be some audio. And you want to use your...
okay, let me go down to audio again.
Yeah, it might be headphone output or something like that.
Got it. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. You can still hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
In the cans?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm hearing you in the cans. Okay. Cool. All right. Anyways.
You're talking about car forwarding and...
Oh, right. Sorry here. So distracted. So the general problem we're trying to deal with is you've got your train, you've bid well, and you got the local, because that's usually one of the first jobs to go, and your yard is at Anna, and you have work at Bess, Clara, Dora, and you're heading for a second yard at Edna, for example. just use them in alphabetical order so we can figure out what we're doing. So there's, then the question is, well, what do you do when you get there? How do you know which cars you're going to set out? How do you know which cars you're going to pull? And there's a number of ways to do that. There's some very informal systems. There are some quick visual systems like tab on car. There are waybills, which probably is the most prevalent method. And there's just a whole bunch of variety. And depending on what you're trying to achieve, there are several ways to do that. And finally, there are switch lists, which, is just what it sounds like. It's a list that says, here's a road number in a car, SP 734581, and it's a whatever kind of car it is. It's probably a chip gone in that series, and it's going to go to the paper mill or wherever it's going to go. And all the crew has is a list of cars and where to spot them or where to pick them up from. And generally, if you pick it up, it's just going to the next yard. It's relatively rare, even the classic era, that you would have a real short haul. In the real world today, if it's not going to move at least, 300 or 400 miles with a couple of exceptions, there's really no point in putting it in a train. So anyway, these are all different mechanisms for just telling the various people who need to touch the car, the crews and the yard crews especially, where to move cars.
Mm-hmm. The important thing, I think, for people to realize there is you're moving cars with a purpose. You're not just shuffling stuff around, but you're sort of role-playing what the real railroad would do. And for the reasons, they're imaginary reasons, obviously, on a model railroad, no one's getting paid, right? But the reasons why the real railroad would do it. So, for example, if you're sending an empty hopper to the cement factory, then obviously when it's loaded and transported back to wherever it's going, to the port or whatever, then theoretically the railroad just made a bunch of money on it, and not just, here, let's just put this boxcar over there. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be really prototypical that way, but I think it adds a lot of buy-in value if you're doing it like a real railroad, where, because, like, for example, you wouldn't have an oil tank go to, I don't know, I'm just thinking of a fruit company, right? You'd have a reefer go to a fruit company, and then presumably it would come back loaded. I guess you could send an oil tanker. Maybe they're delivering fuel for the tractors. I don't know, but I'm just saying that, right? So
yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And there obviously you can run a special load or do something unusual with that, but typically you would have a car that's appropriate for the commodities that shipper is handling, or that consignee is handling.
That's a better way of saying what I just tried to say. But
yeah, you can have fun with it. I've got a winery, Villa Armando, and normally it handles refrigerated, insulated boxcars because they're going to ship box cases of wine. And we imagine this winery is not a fine wine producer. They are, quantity producers of red swill. And it turns out that this particular winery was the subject of a very nasty family feud before it eventually shut down and was sold for condo space. So now it's a bunch of townhouses in Pleasanton. But there were some rumors that it was owned by an organized crime family. So we ship it a cement hopper every so often, so they don't run out of shoes.
Yeah. See, I knew where that was going after you mentioned that. Well, I mean, but it's relevant on your layout because you have the cement place right there around the corner from it.
Exactly. So you can have some fun with these routings.
I noticed also, Seth, that your winery is right next to the ACE station. So if the passengers want to get rowdy on the train, they can get, get a little tipsy before they board the Ace train.
They absolutely can. You know, I don't know. You know, yeah, I've seen other fun things like lithium loads on the depressed center flat car. You know, oh, I'm so depressed. Obviously, you know, depression is nothing really to joke about, but we have a little fun on the railroads, and it doesn't have to be politically correct all the time.
Well, we catch heat for that sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, we do. Anyway, so, you know, we talk about various types of routing, and I mentioned at the top informal car routing. And, you know, John really kind of teed this up pretty well by saying, you know, it's not just randomly moving cars around, but, you know, most of us had our first idea of this when we had the Christmas tree oval, and maybe we were fortunate enough, you know, if you were like me, where it came downstairs and ended up on a ping pong table and was available during the winter. I lived in the Northeast. There would be a couple of spurs off the railroad, and very quickly you realized that you could pick up a car and move it from one siding to the other. And, you know, we learned the basic concept that it's much easier to switch trailing point. In other words, the locomotive goes by the siding and then backs in and moves the cars. Facing point operations are a little more difficult. And usually you end up with a runaround, a place where, you know, the locomotive can cut off the cars, you know, come back down another track and then come back in from the other end. But those are time-consuming moves, and generally when you're switching, you try to plan your work so you don't do too much of that.
I have a question, Seth, that someone watching might have in mind. You were talking on the previous slide about the different ways of identifying the cars, and I know a lot of N-scalers have an issue with that, and they tend to use that tab system where you have a big thing on the car, but a lot of people don't like that because it doesn't look prototypical anymore once you have a colored tab on the top of your car or side of your car. Do you have any recommendations for people that, I mean, other than go to HO, okay, that operate an N scale, that want to have realistic operations without using one of those sort of ugly tab systems?
Well, actually, you know, that's you've read ahead. That's the next slide. So why don't we just move on? No, that's okay.
I didn't know that it was there because I haven't had a chance to see the presentation. So
yeah, there you go. All right, so let's talk a little bit about tack on car or tab on car. And you know, this has been around for a long time. Bruce Chubb wrote a book about operations, which for many years was, I think, probably the only serious work, and is still something that I think any serious operator should find. It's long since out of print, but they do show up on eBay and at train shows. I know if I see one and it seems to be lonely, I pick it up, you know, so that it's available. If you're looking for a copy, contact me offline. I'll see if I have an extra one. But what it does is it gives you a nice visual cue, so you don't have to carry any paperwork around. It's nice in N-scale because the letters are small, and some of us have a lot of trouble reading that. You know, yeah, exactly, and I find I'm wearing readers more and more for that kind of work.
For me, it's more like this in N-scale.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You know, to go directly to your question, John, and then we'll come back and finish commentary on tab on car. The thing that I've seen that works pretty well is people using a variant of car cards, which is yet another slide or two down the line, where they include a photo of the car. So if you don't mind spending a little extra time when setting up to photograph the car, and you probably want to get them all end on so it's easy to see where the numbers are, then, you know, you can visually give the operator a pretty good clue of what he's looking for. Now, of course, most industries that have more than one spot tend to take a couple of cars of the same general type. They may even be in the same numbering series. My friend Jim Providenza, who in many ways was a guru to me early in my operating career, tells a story about he was a beat policeman in Union City, California, and one of the on his rounds, he would pass this industry, and being a rail fan also, he would stop and take a look at what was there. And what he realized pretty quickly is there was a pool of about 20 cars, and it was the same 20 cars all the time, and they were in captive service between this industry and some supplier. And that happened in the classic era, and it's extremely common today that cars will be in captive pools. So the question is, which one's which? Well, the answer is they're probably all the same commodity going to the same place. So that's okay. I mean, for increased play value, we like to mix it up a little bit, but there's certainly no problem with having two 60-foot oxide brown cars in the same numbering sequence. And you would see that. And, if you see a train out on the road, you very often see a block of 3 or 4 cars that look pretty much the same. And the chances are they came from the same shipper and they're going to the same consignee. So the photo car card is probably the best answer to the I don't like tack on car. Mm-hmm. And it's an aesthetic thing. I mean, I understand why people don't want to drill holes in the car to put tacks in. Little plastic channels work nice. They fit well on, I think I used the term house car. That's anything that looks like a box car, a box car, a reefer, an insulated box, sometimes called an RBL or a beer car, all those things. Many covered hoppers have roof walks, even some tankers. But, for your open loads that might be a little bit delicate, I can understand why people don't want to take that beautiful load they spent an awful lot of time working on and then, let's just drop a little plastic channel in here and hope it doesn't get wedged in anything delicate. So, right. But that's certainly workable. Again, the benefits are no paperwork. If you're smart about it and you kind of keep account of what you've assigned where, and it's pretty easy to see just by looking for the colors on the tabs or channels, you can control the number of cars going to a given place. Because one thing that tends to happen is that railroads will get out of balance. You'll get too many cars in one place, not enough in the others, and you end up with a lot of off spots. Now, if you expect that and you have a place where extra cars can be left, then that adds some interest to the next train that comes along, because usually the sequence would be pull all the outbound cars and set out all the inbound cars. You can mix that up a little bit by saying, well, some of these cars haven't been unloaded yet because they might buy a tank car of corn syrup at the bakery, and rather than pump it into their tank, they'll just pay demurrage, which is essentially extra rental on the tank for a while. Or if it's a leased car, they already own the car. They don't have to pay for that. So rather than building a tank and pumping it around and having more stuff to keep clean and justify to the health inspector, they just park the car out there, connect their hoses up, and they'll work through it over a period of days or weeks. And hopefully by then there's another, car has arrived and the railroad comes and hauls it away. But if it's a car that you don't own or control through a lease, you will expect to pay extra fees if you don't get it unloaded and out of there. So those are referred to demurrage rules. People who get into it, can incorporate that in their operations for some additional interest. Let's see. Anyway, you can manage that.
I have a question, Seth. You mentioned about people running similar cars in blocks and having operated in many places yourself. Have you seen that in a lot of places where people just say it's a block of 3 box cars that has to go to XYZ place and they don't worry about the numbers on them?
We especially see that with coal hoppers and ore
Okay.
hoppers. So yeah.
Well, coal tends to travel in unit trains anyway, right? On most layouts.
Well, it does today, because we're running, low sulfur Powder River coal, which is basically flammable dirt, and the only place it would go is to a power station. So
Or
the
China.
train, or China, right?
Yeah.
Generally, well, metallurgical coal might not, for example. It has to be, relatively free of impurities, and it's used, as a metallurgical input to, steel making and other metallurgical processes. That might not travel in a whole train. And particularly if you're running an Appalachian coal hauler, you tended to have bituminous coal, which was pretty messy stuff to work with, but very high energy content, and that would be used for industrial purposes, steam and, for power plants and for heating of commercial buildings with big boilers. But, people didn't want that in their residences. And, well into the 50s, people were using anthracite, right? Anthracite was generally shipped in smaller blocks. To a local coal dealer or a feed and seed. Many Midwestern towns would have a couple of elevators, an oil dealer, and somebody handling coal. Very often it would be the feed and seed or a hardware store, which those kind of overlapped a little bit. So, you get those Midwestern elevator towns, you would see short blocks of coal hoppers. And then you have to deal with, do I want to ship the loaded car back to the yard, or do I come around between trains and remove the load, which is another cue to the crew that maybe that hopper is ready to be moved. So, some combination of those, even in N scale, may eliminate the need for an ugly tack. Let me see, what else did we say here? I think we've talked through all these points. Do you have anything else on this, John?
On this slide, no. I do want to point out, though, that we are at the top of the hour, and I don't know if you need a bio break or anything like that. I thought I'd mention it in case you do, because I don't want you to be uncomfortable sitting there. I'm okay if you're okay. Checking. Yeah, hold on. Let me see.
I'm trying to look very uncomfortable and constipated, but...
I knew I shouldn't have had you on here, Seth.
This isn't broadcast. I mean, I was in college. I did college radio, and had to be very careful about what the friendly candy company would think about what you said. But,
yeah, but this is going to be here forever on YouTube because people can pick it up on the replay now.
Oh, well, if it's here forever, it'll outlast me a long time.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about being embarrassed when you're not around anymore.
I think they'll remember me as somebody who told a lot of bathroom jokes. That'll be fine.
Yeah, well, these people haven't been on our hikes. They don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I would invite you, if you're ever in the Bay Area on a Friday, you're welcome to hike with John and me and join the DCC lunch. And, you'll be taking a deep dive, but that's all right. We like more people. Anyway, waybills are probably the dominant method of doing car routing on model railroads. Sometimes referred to as car cards and waybills, but this is where I should have done some visual aids here. But a car card is like a little envelope, and it has the car's information. In other words, its road number, its road name, generally something telling you the type of car, and many of us put a little bit of maintenance information just so we can keep track of, has the car been checked for a number of critical things like droopy couplers in some recent time. And it's also where particularly N-scalers would tend to print a photo of the car. So that tells you what car it is, but then there's the question of where does it go? So a guy named Don McFall, I think about 30 or 40 years ago now, maybe 50, wrote an article in MR around sometime in the 70s or early 80s, describing this system. And essentially what you have is a little business card sized piece of paper that fits into this little envelope. And, by using the top and the bottom and the front and the back, you got 4 different locations. And you could say this car is going to go, okay, we're assuming it starts in the yard and it's going to go to some shipper as an empty. Then that shipper will send it to a consignee. He's a lumber mill, and he's going to send this hardwood to a furniture factory. And the furniture factory is going to send it to a furniture warehouse. And then it's going to get returned to empty status. Or maybe it just keeps going around. So by flipping the car automatically routes itself. And, that works fairly well. Obviously, the movements are repetitive, but even if you run every other week, if you have 10 people and they take different jobs, it's going to be several months before the same guy, before anybody but the owner and whoever helps with reset sees that car twice. So I don't see that as a huge problem. The other thing is you can short cycle the bills. Not every bill has to go through all 4 steps. It may go, in the case of my railroad, there are cars going into the NUMMI automobile plant, and he's shipping stampings to Arlington, Texas, and he's getting cars coming back. So the pool is just out and back, or from the cement plant in Red Rocks near Redding, California, to Lehigh Cement at the reload, and then it goes back to Red Rocks. And, so there's only 2 cycles on that. There's no need for it to move anywhere else. In the transition area, you have a lot more what we call free rollers, and those cars could move. Another thing some people do is they have lots of waybills that are appropriate for a particular type of car. And after that car has gone through a cycle, when you get to cycle 4, you pick it up, put the card back in the stack, and draw another card. And now this car has another random route. Now, you're still responsible for keeping some sort of balance between cars and industries so that, they all have a certain amount of traffic moving. The real railroad doesn't care, and a lot of industries, in fact, are seasonal and might not see anything for 6 months. And then, they might just have reefers everywhere and a siding somewhere full of more for when they have more fruit. And that would be very typical if you were modeling, say, Salinas. John, did you have a question there?
No, sir. I'm just, I just sent you a message to let you know that I'm trying to not ask questions so that you can get through the...
Oh, move it along is what you're saying.
No,
okay.
No. You should be as thorough as you need to be, because I think this is all important stuff, but I've noticed that people in the chat are asking about sort of off-topic stuff that you'd be a great person to ask some of these questions.
Okay.
So.
Well, tell you what, let's not do quite so deep a dive, and we'll cover the high points. And, we can always come back and do another show with more detail if there's some interest in that. And if there's not, that's fine too. Won't hurt my feelings.
Sure. I want to mention to the viewers, if you have questions about operations, please type them into the live chat on the side there, and we will, especially if they're relevant to what Seth is talking about on the slide here, we'll try to get to them. So
yeah, and if they don't fit into the flow, we'll pick them up at the end. It's not a long prezo, so we'll be pretty close. Let's see. So as I say, you can cycle through in order or not. On my layout, frankly, it's like a list of possible destinations, and I'm more concerned about the train, as I build them and reset, having the right number of cars, the right number of industries. So generally the cards are set up as, what are some likely places this car could go? And usually I can get them by just cycling around till I find what I want. And if not, I just grab another one out of the deck that does. Let's see. At some point, each car needs to be touched for reset. So again, the layout can get out of balance. That's really the point I'm driving at there. A disadvantage of this waybill thing is that you really have to walk around and inventory all the cars periodically to keep the thing from getting out of balance. And not too bad of a problem on my layout, which will maybe have 150 cars on it in a one time. And I'll try and, rotate maybe another 200 of the total, fleet in and out periodically. And that kind of complements the rotating the waybills business. Dave Falkenberg points out that there's a movement very much led by Tony Thompson to have more prototypical waybills, and we'll touch that in a second. So you do have to worry about this management. Now, on the other hand, if a car gets misrouted, because we don't always get and there are mistakes in the real world too. We don't always get the cars where they're supposed to go. The nice thing is sitting there with a waybill, the next crew that comes along will usually pick it up and sort it out. One big problem with waybills, which people don't usually talk about, is they tend to be pretty thick. And if you have a 30-car train, you're dealing with, where's my camera here? Something like this, an inch or two thick, trying to hold it in the pouch on the back of a clipboard or something, and they tend to get dropped. And we call that 52 pickup. And it takes a long time to get it sorted out, because then you have to walk the train, get the cars in order, figure out what you were doing, or, just kind of go, well, not going to deal with it this time. And the result is that work gets run and the cars end up in the wrong place. And you will also need to provide a dedicated space to sort the cards. And so you've got to have some kind of track mounted on the front, or the worst thing to do is lean them against the car, because they typically get knocked off by passing trains or cause derailments. And the late great Andy Sparandio used to just hate that. And every time I see somebody doing that at an operating session, particularly at a big name meet, I kind of go, Andy's ghost is frowning on you. Let's see. Dave Falkenberg covered an interesting point, which we may have on the next chart, and that was the all-in-one waybill. And so a traditional waybill done by a railroad would show the consignee and the shipper, and it's all one document. There wouldn't be a separate car card. So you would just have a stack of waybills. And Tony has set up a system to do that. But this is very labor intensive in reset. You have to go ahead and assign a particular waybill. At the end of the run, that waybill, typically goes back in the pile, or in some systems, I think Lee Nicholas's, you just throw it away and he prints a new one. So again, this is totally manageable for 150 cars. My friend Bryn Eckroot and I usually do that before every op session, and we go out to dinner, work on it for an hour and a half, and that's the evening.
Is that a pretty big job, Seth, for layout owners, having to manage all this crap? Because it seems to me like is it?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
You want to have it automated somehow. Doesn't JMRI have some provision for automating some of this stuff?
Well, that's the comes up in the next chart, and we'll handle that. So, yeah, owners vary. Our friend Rick Fortin, who lives up the road a few miles here, has 1,200 cars on the layout, and his reset involves half a dozen people over a couple of work sessions. So it's a lot of work, but Rick gets unique trains that, feel different, and you can look at those trains on the railroad and know which one's which. If you don't mind more generic trains, you can let the waybill cycle more or less endlessly until something gets horribly out of balance. There's very good discussion of waybill systems in the OPSIG Compendium for the listener who typed in that one, yes. And if you look at your table of contents, you will find some discussion of that, I believe. I didn't write that chapter, but I'm pretty sure it's there.
Something that I want to mention, and maybe it's just my ignorance because I don't have a layout, so I'm not a layout owner that has to deal with this, but it almost seems to me like if you run your operations all in one direction, or one job for each session, it seems like it would be self-balancing, because you're sending your loads somewhere on this session, and then you're bringing back your empties, and then the next time you could be sending your empty, presumably the loaded ones back, and bringing your empties back again. It just doesn't. It seems like it should be self-balancing. I guess people don't always run that way, though, do they?
Well, it doesn't quite work out that way. I mean, people who try that usually end up going to 4-cycle waybills because they find that boring. That even though the operators probably don't notice it, the owner finds it very unsatisfying. The other thing is directional loads. The coal tends to go to tidewater, and the empties should be coming back to the mines. If you see the same open load run more than once, it starts to feel a little toy-like. So you go to all this trouble and build a really cool open load of that, piece of construction equipment or that military train. But, if it comes by again 2 hours later, not so much.
I guess it's more of a personal preference thing then, huh? Like if you just want to keep things easy for yourself, you could do what I suggested. But if you get bored with that, then obviously you have to go to something more complex. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an aesthetic thing. We have another owner here who's moved a few times and rebuilt, and he has a railroad set in Michigan, and his scheme uses these car cards. They're essentially 4-cycle cards, and they're nicely done in laminated plastic so that they hold up to wear well. But essentially, you just flip the cars, and they run from Grand Rapids to ferry at Sault Ste. Marie. I think it's Sault Ste. Marie. Anyway, it's upper Michigan car float operation. You get the idea. And the trains all look the same because you're just constantly shuffling the same cars back and forth. So there's not a particular concept of, this train is mostly wood products, or this train is mostly, interchanged with a friendly connection that would have more home road cars from the area it was coming from. So it just depends on the story you're trying to tell. Right.
I think the question that's up on the screen might be good for after the presentation, because it sounds like a more in-depth answer would be for that. So that's a good question. I do want to come back to it. So let's not forget Dennis's question. Let me hide that for now, but I do want to bring up another one, because this one might be relevant to what you're talking about right now, which is generating switch lists. Is there...
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that, because switch lists are... Let's talk just a moment about switch lists, and then we'll kind of dive into what programs use it. So a switch list, as I mentioned further up in the session, is basically a little shopping list where you just list each car and, are you lifting it? And if you're lifting it, is it going back to the yard, or is it going somewhere else? And then of the cars you've got in your consist, where am I putting them? And they can be very specific. An industry might have several doors, and different types of commodities go to different doors. You imagine a warehouse, and you have different types of commodities, and they want them to go into different places in that warehouse, or a freight house might be something like that. Real railroads use this. In fact, what you see today is it's printed out, usually on a crummy old dot matrix printer, surprisingly often, or a laser printer. And, you just take that piece of paperwork, and the conductor takes that, walks his train, makes sure he's got what he's supposed to have, and takes off down the road. So big benefit is no piles of cars and slips to get lost and misfiled, maybe go home with the operator by mistake. These are typically one-time lists, so you just print another one out. There are a number of programs, as the caller wrote in, that generate reasonably prototypical traffic flows, and they can deal with seasonality. They can randomize the number of cars while still checking that you don't overload a particular siding. One real nice thing is they can generate reports or switch lists, and that's great. They're very often sorted for the local so that if you try and switch the cars in order, it's more or less optimal. So it helps you organize your work well. They don't do as well for yards, typically, for a variety of reasons. And Dave Falkenberg is pointing out JMRI Ops, which is probably the dominant program today. And we'll come to that in a sec. The one big problem with switch lists is that if somebody doesn't deliver things to where they're supposed to be, it's rather difficult to find them. And then there's a manual process that usually involves going to a computer or carrying a laptop or a tablet with you and rekeying it. I have a friend who has used an RFID product I make to help the system reset, but even then, there's a little bit of work to doing it. So, and RFID, while I love it and I think it's incredibly cool, is an expensive complication that, perhaps a dozen owners have used. But it works pretty well. So,
if you want to talk about doing what the prototype railroads do, if you're modeling a modern prototype, that's it. I mean,
that's exactly what they do.
Right? That's how they keep track of their stuff. There's
and it's
a lot of cars running around.
It's a little gray box, that's one on each side of the car, about the size of a cell phone, and that's how the railroads keep track of them. Mm-hmm. But this is fairly complicated, and you don't need to go do all that work. Dave Falkenberg put up a couple of smaller systems, and you can do switch list generators in Excel if you're, you like to do Excel macros or don't mind doing a little bit of sorting and selecting. But the major program that's out there is JMRI. It's JMRI Ops. It's part of the JMRI freeware, although I certainly encourage a donation to JMRI, especially this time of year, just for the volunteers' help and to try and cover some of the operating costs of the organization. There are a couple of commercial ones out there. I believe Shenware is one Byron liked, and I know he's got some issues with his website, but I believe it's still available. There was one called RailOp, which I'm probably going to get in trouble with this. My understanding is that support for the thing has kind of petered out over the years, and about the time that was happening, there was a great big push on JMRI Ops development. So what you'll find is that JMRI Ops has a whole lot of features to help migrate from RailOp and to allow an environment that RailOp guys would be comfortable with, because that was the big pool of switch list generator people who were comfortable with computers and needed some help at the time this became available. And it's very nice, and it's integrated with a bunch of other stuff in JMRI. So if you like JMRI, and I think almost everybody uses it, if only for Decoder Pro, it's a good place to start. My feeling would be, if you are interested in computerized switch list generation, start with JMRI Ops. I mean, because it's not going to cost you anything. Most of your investment in any of these things is going to be in the effort to set it up. But, because it's free, there's a great big community and a very active list. And, obviously the best thing to do is have a friend who's got an ops scheme like yours, who's already done it, to walk you through it. And you're much more likely to find that with JMRI just because of the size of the installed base. So, and it's a good program. I mean, this is not entirely a left-handed endorsement, but, there's definitely strength in numbers here.
Sure. I mean, JMRI has all kinds of forums and people that are real experts in it. I think of our friend John Schmidt that does Paul Weiss's ops. I think he generates all his stuff on JMRI, doesn't he? On JMRI operations?
Yeah, on both the Central Vermont and Northern California. Paul's layout in his own Nicasio Northern,
right?
And it works quite well. There's issues, but there's issues with everything. Right. Can Seths RFI? Well, that's kind of a whole different show. We're in a little bit of a transition there. So I would say you probably want some Java or Jam or Jython experience. If you have that kind of expertise and are interested in participating, you should get in touch with me offline, because I think we need to update that product line a little bit. So I wouldn't tell you it's the be-all and end-all, but it's a very nice tool that with a little work could be made to work very nicely.
Maybe we should mention that, Seth. I don't know that a lot of people watching know this, but Seth runs the model, what's it called? Model Railroad?
What are those people? Model Railroad Control
Systems. That's it. Yeah. What's the website?
www.modelrailroadcontrolsystems, all one word, a lot of typing, .com. And I think Sid put a link up earlier. But yeah, I have a website, and just click on info or just sales at, and happy to advise you. I don't expect that everybody who talks to me will purchase instantly, so it's pretty low pressure. Right.
The important thing, though, is that it's especially if you're looking to do the signaling stuff, because you really specialize in signaling stuff, don't you? More than anything else?
Signaling and phones are my main things.
Right. Oh, I got to tell you a funny story about that. I've been to just real quick. I know this is a tangent and it's not really relevant to the whole operations things, but I've been to other layouts, even in other parts of the country. And as soon as I see the phones, I think of you, Seth. And because 9 times out of 10, I will ask someone, "Oh, who did your phones?" And you know the answer. That guy. Like, I know that guy.
I know that man. Yeah. That's the man. He did it.
It makes me feel almost famous, Like, I know Seth.
So how often when you mention my name do they get a restraining order against you?
Yeah, no, that hasn't happened yet. So maybe I just haven't been to the right places. I'm dealing only with shady people because they all like you.
Well, I'm happy to throw some shade. So anyway, that's the quick answer to the switch list problem. And it's a matter of preference. I have a friend here who's just loves yards, and he just loves car cards, and he just does not like working switch lists. And then I know a lot of other people who really prefer switch lists. I myself, if it's a complicated set of moves, for example, Tony Thompson, I'll just write out a switch list first before I try and move anything. Because Tony's layout, rather prototypically, when you come into these towns, the majority of the cars won't move. They're still being loaded or unloaded. And so one of the important things is getting the spots back where they belong. This is also true on a lot of Midwestern railroads that model, elevator towns. We touched on that earlier. It was very common on the GN and the Canadian Pacific and a couple of other, railroads that catered to wheat producing areas to have one siding, typically with all the elevators on the north side of the siding, so the sun would keep things a little better lit and warmer if they were trying to unload during, inclement weather, which is most of the year. And you would pull the whole siding. Some number of cars were still being worked. Pull out the empties, splice the inbound cars, or pull out the loads, I should say, that were coming back, from the elevator. Splice the incoming cars and the holds back in order, and shove them back into the siding. So, for that sort of thing, switch lists are great because you can easily see where the holes are. If you try and do that with car cards, at least me, you end up missing a couple of them. and or they end up on the floor, or they end up upside down, or there's any other number of unfortunate issues. So as I say, let me see. We talked about if things are out of line, it's a little bit of work in most switchless systems to correct them. So what else do we do?
I have a question that's just about, getting set up for the next op session. So
sure.
If you discover that someone misrouted a car and it's sitting in the wrong place now, and this probably is different for every person, but do you, as a layout owner, just 050 it to where it should be, or do you work it into the next session so that it gets put in the right place by someone with a train?
It depends on how badly it's been fouled up. Now, I mean, honestly, in my scheme, it doesn't really hurt anything because we're going to come along and do it later. And if it's especially creative rerouting, we call one another over and have a good laugh. But, it doesn't hurt anything. If somebody puts an 86-foot, auto body parts car, into a cement plant, amazing.
Or at the winery.
At the winery, we'll 050 it out. If it just ended up in the wrong track in the yard, we'll mark it as off spot. Generally I like to leave the yard fairly well organized because generally at the end of the shift it would be fairly well organized, and the clerk scheme encourages the clerk to keep things organized. So, he may ask the next train that's working in the yard to move a couple of cars around to straighten things out. So, it depends. If it's really ridiculous and it would be hard to get it back to where it belongs, we 050 it. Otherwise, it's fun. We do have some off spots and respots, so it can be fun.
Well, the best part's getting to make fun of whoever put it there.
Well, absolutely. And we have some other things. I modeled 1999. So if we have a derailment, I have a couple of side boom, pipe layer type tractors, usually associated with a firm called Hulcher, which cleans up derailments under contracts for most of the major Western railroads. And if somebody really makes a mess out of it, we move the Hulchers over there and leave them there for the rest of the session as kind of a reminder. But Dave Lovelace has an employee of the month plaque that
nice.
You have to carry around if you do something especially stupid.
Well, right, but the two important things are it's all in good fun.
Exactly.
And the other important thing is you're doing it to have fun. So if you can't take a ribbing from your buddies, maybe you should. I was gonna say maybe you should play with yourself. That means something different.
Boy, here it is. Took us an hour and a half, and we've gotten to those jokes, John. That's something of a record. But the other side of it is, feel free to do a little ribbing. It's okay. We're all here having fun.
I think most people at these sessions wouldn't take it the wrong way. I mean, as long as they're not being really mean about it, right?
Yeah, don't be mean and rude, and don't pick on the noob who really doesn't know any better.
Right.
It's either a teachable moment or we can just have a laugh. Right. We're going to go out, have lunch, maybe a beer later, and this is how we learn. One other thing about car routing I wanted to touch on, and this may be a little bit of an advanced topic, is car requests. So the question is, how do we know when to start the cycle? How do we know when a shipper has some stuff that he wants shipped, which starts the whole cycle? Most of our systems is sort of implicit, right? We have that, we're following that car cards routing. And so, it starts out empty, comes from, in the real world, a car supply manager, and gets delivered to a yard. There were what were called car service rules that had to do with which empties could be used for shipping what stuff where. And there's a whole interesting history and science of that. could be important to transition era modelers. Later days kind of ignored. Some people actually have operator agents, particularly on timetable and train order layouts, that simulated the guy who was in the office, in the depot in each town. And he would, in fact, handle train orders, but he would only get, maybe a dozen or two a day. And the rest of the time he was selling tickets and dealing with freight and so forth. And he would figure out which shippers, needed a boxcar and communicate to the yard that an empty needed to be delivered to the shipper. So people model this in different ways. If you're interested in doing that, we need to create car request slips or some mechanism like that. And then the question is, what are the car service rules? Obviously, you had to have a car suitable for the lading. In other words, grain wanted to be a clean box car suitable for grain doors. You wouldn't want to ship, say, hides and that, because
put corn syrup in your oil tanker.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that renders the car useless. And tanks you raise a great example. If you're going to ship a different commodity in the tank, especially a food grade tank, it has to be cleaned thoroughly, and that takes the car out of service for a while, and it's an expensive process.
It's cheaper to build a new one, probably.
Well, exactly. There have been some long stories about that. So that's an interesting feature you can model. What else did we talk about? And then I just another chart here, and then we'll go to the questions. I think of just organizing. Boy, this thing didn't do a great job of, what do you call it?
It's organizing.
Yeah, organizing. Your train.
One of the slides was like that too, but I thought you were just being stylish.
No. This was I think it's the descendant. Remember Clippy, that annoying little thing that would make suggestions while you worked?
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I stopped using PCs 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Clippy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, okay, so this is, artificial stupidity.
As opposed to artificial intelligence? Got it.
Yes, exactly.
Great.
Yeah, so, computer can make a bonehead move too, which sometimes figures into car forwarding software.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
Yeah. This is, it doesn't quite fit into the car forwarding category, but if you're working a local, what do? Generally, when I come into town, I try to divide the town into north track, south track, if it's got a siding, facing point and trailing point. And I try to avoid runarounds, as I mentioned earlier, because they take a lot of time and you end up fouling the main. And depending on the area, you either have to go flag out and protect your train, or you have to call the dispatcher and get permission to occupy the main. And this all takes a lot of time. So you generally like to not do that. But you can imagine a north side, south side, facing point, trailing point, and so you have 4 quadrants, and for each quadrant, pull everything that's coming with you and all the holds, and then organize the setouts, the cars you're delivering, and the holds and any respots, which are cars that maybe were delivered to the wrong place, either intentionally because there was no place to put them, or because the last guy was a bonehead. So your job is to reorganize that. And as I mentioned, I try to avoid runarounds. So, once I'm working one end, I try to work that end until I can't do any more. Very often while you're working, particularly on a branch, in the real world, a lot of these branches had 2 trains a day, and the second train was you coming back. So it was perfectly okay to leave your cars on the main because nobody else was going to come along. Model railroads, we tend to run, more or less subway system kind of headway, so it may not be possible. But very often you can. Or you may have a spur that doesn't have much in it that if there's no particular rule against using it to stash a few cars, you can keep things out of the way while you're doing your work. Another place to keep cars is in your handle. In other words, you may be only worried about the 3 cars at the end, but you've got 10 cars in your train. Well, in the real world, up to about 30 cars was okay to work. Any more than that, the amount of slack action and number of guys on the ground to pass signals got, a little bit out of hand with the standard crew. And let's see, if you're running a turn, and an awful lot of locals were, a turn's a train that runs out one way and then it comes back. It either runs from, Anna to Edna, which is, say, the second yard on odd days, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then comes back east on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. So they may only work the trailing point spurs on the way out. And then they'll work what were originally the facing point spurs. When you come back, now they're trailing point. You may also dig some cars out, but they're going back to Anna, so you just leave them somewhere you can get at them easily that's not blocking the main and working on the way back. That allows you to work with a shorter train, less stuff to get out of the way, easier to do your work when you get there. Rick Fortin, who we talked about earlier, has a train called the Douglas Raymond Turn, affectionately referred to as the dirt or the dirt bag. And that's the good way to work the dirt, because when you get up to Raymond, there's really not much room to work. And you leave stuff in Douglas, and then when you come back through Douglas, you pick the stuff up and go back down to Reading. So those are some interesting ideas, and at some point may come back with some drawings, maybe even some animations to talk about that some more.
Yeah,
and
I think it's worth pointing out too that really what you're talking about is very prototypical, because that's how real train crews would work. They're trying to do as few moves as possible in as efficient a fashion as they can, because time is money. And frankly, they don't want to, like for the other thing about trying to run or trying to limit the length of your train, the conductor doesn't want to walk a mile train to do the set outs and stuff. So yeah, that all makes a lot of sense to me, just having been familiar with what prototype railroads do. So very cool.
Of course, in the day, they would typically either, if they could get everything done within the minimum call out, which I think was 8 hours, they would quote unquote go for the quit. Otherwise, they would, in a 16-hour day, they would try and come back into the yard at 15:59, milk
Sure.
it for every cent they could get.
Yeah, well, these are hourly guys,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so John, have you been keeping track of the questions we didn't answer in real time? I probably went on a little longer than I should have.
Yeah, it's okay. There were a lot of very interesting questions that were kind of off topic, but why don't we talk a minute? Let me just try this. If you have a question that's about operations specifically, type it in, and we'll definitely try to get to those now. Also, we have to talk about 2 other things, Seth, I think. One is model railroad control systems, because I think if people know about this resource who don't already know about it, that would be a good thing, because you do stuff, I think, that would help a lot of people with your company. The other thing that we have to talk about is the SIG meet that we're going to be doing in February. We can get to that toward the end, because there's probably some new details that we'll reveal in this program for people that have been watching or staying tuned in about that. So why don't you talk, while we're waiting for operations questions, about MRCS and kind of what you do with that and what kind of stuff people can find there. So if I'm someone who's looking to implement RFID in my layout, I know I can go there and find all kinds of great stuff. Or if I'm someone who's looking to create a fully functioning signaling system on my layout, I know that is a resource for me.
Super. So let's see, model railroad control systems, I'm going to call it MRCS, as opposed to the Craig Biziger, I guess, podcast, which is also good. Is something that my former partner, my late partner, Chuck Catania, and I founded about 5 years ago. And we were helping people set up signaling systems, and I was doing phone systems for model railroads, and Chuck was also doing train order board systems. Anyway, we found that, almost everywhere we went in the Bay Area helping people out, we each had run across the other's handiwork, and we knew one another. We're part of that DCC lunch group. And we started working together, and really our idea was to create a place where you could get model railroads electronics for model railroad operations. So communication systems, in the sense of phones, train order boards, full signaling systems. We have a line of switch motors, accessories to control various kinds of switch motors, parts to enhance CMRI, which is a system we like a lot, and our signaling system is all based on CMRI protocols and works with Dr. Chubb's classic CMRI boards. We do an RFID system, which allows you to, put RFID tags on each car like the railroad does, and generate switch lists and so forth. So I would encourage you to take a look at the site, browse around. Again, you can get in touch with me as sales@modelrailroadcontrolsystems.com. Happy to help explain anything that maybe doesn't make sense, help design solutions using those parts, and frankly, stuff that we don't make. I mean, we don't make everything you could possibly want. And, generally try and be helpful with this stuff. It's been a lot of fun. I mean, I get a lot of satisfaction just helping people implement systems. So,
right. That's one of the things I've noticed about a lot of our mutual friends now, Seth, is in our area, is that everyone's always so willing to help and generous with their time and information. It's such a pleasure to just know everybody in the circle. It's just really cool.
Yeah, and
I was going to say that's one of the things really about just the DCC lunch, the Coast Division of the PCR of the NMRA. It's just a really great group of people. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a great group, and operations really ties into that, because that's where we get together and hang out and do things with model railroads. Realize, it would be better if we did something as simple as my friend John Plocker, who's contributed a lot of great designs to MRCS. And let me add that one thing. It's a little bit of a clearinghouse. Maybe 20 or 30 of the % of the products are things I've designed or Chuck designed. An awful lot of it is contributed by others who work with us. And John Plocker is one of the great contributors. He made a little flagman, right? He's a little brakeman guy who has a little LED in his hand, and you can put it on the track, and it's obviously a track power tester. But also, under certain operating schemes, if you were going to occupy the track and you didn't know if an extra might be coming along, you had to send somebody out with a flag or a flare, a fusee.
A human fusee.
Yeah, to tell them to slow down and not run into someone. So, I mean, that's just a cool little thing for operations. And, we sell them as little kits in 4-packs and 8-packs, and they're cheap. So all kinds of stuff like that. And, I would also just give a shout out to there's probably a dozen guys like us out there who make, detectors, crossing gate systems, various sound effects, parts for CTC boards. And, we work in that ecosystem, and they all do a great job. We generally try to help each other out. So if you come to me, and I think if you come to most of them, and, they can supply most of the system, but something else is needed, we'll work cooperatively. Very often we sell each other stuff, or if it's just going to waste a lot of your money shipping things, we'll say, buy this, this, and this for me, and that, and that from Dennis or Alan or, whoever it is. And, we'll try and build something that works for you. So, it's very much a community doing cool stuff, and we just are more interested in getting cool stuff in people's hands, and, nobody's getting rich off of this. We're all in for the hobby.
Right, you're solving problems or helping people solve problems, and at the same time promoting a hobby that you love. And I think, it's an interesting, I'm not going to go off into the weeds on this, but that's kind of how I look at what I do on my channel. I've had people complain about ads and stuff like that. It's like, well, I got to keep the lights on. So,
right, exactly.
Believe me, no one's getting rich here either, or else I never would have started a Patreon page, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But I do want to point out the question that was here about, do you think that's enough of a plug for MRCS? I mean, I just want to make sure people understand what you do and know that it's a resource.
Oh, well, thank you. I think that's great. As I say, check out the webpage, take a look around, and feel free to get in touch. There's contact us links all over the place, and happy to help.
Right. We're easy to find, because you might also find us hiking at Rancho on Fridays, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go with us on a hike. Everybody's invited. I had a question up that our top secret producer made it disappear. Where did it go? Shoot. Well, maybe take this one, and when I find.
Well, okay. So here's Heath with a good question. How prototypical do you need operations? Well, it's your call. Right. It's you're going to have to compress, right? So you won't get everything done. And I one time ran on a really neat railroad built by a railroader somewhere in Indiana, and he was using the Sargent couplers, and they don't self-center, and it's actually a little different than the usual coupler that couples easily, and it's kind of a pain to uncouple. They're the other way around. And this railroad was way up at eye level, so you couldn't look down on the couplers. And I'm sure it was very much like the experience of being a brakeman or conductor walking a train at night. But I was kind of thinking, like, boy, the only thing he didn't do is scatter ballast on the basement floor and have some sprinklers, gently dropping cold mist on you so everything was slippery. So, in my feeling, it's that's a compromise I'm willing to make. Use KD couplers that operate reliably and are reasonably easy to couple and not too hard to uncouple. But, whenever I operate on a real railroader's layout, I realize that they are modeling the world as they see it, and there's something to be learned. It's not necessarily something I want to replicate myself. So I think the question is, it's really your call.
It's the old saying, Seth. Hey, man, it's my layout. Do whatever you like. Some people just want to run what I refer to as a roundy, and that's cool too. If that's the way you enjoy the hobby, have at it. Just enjoy it. There's some old wisdom around. I'm trying to remember who said this, but it's not my idea, but I think it's true. Is that you should try to model the typical. So a good proto freelance railroad, has what I would call a meta prototype. There's some prototype that the guy was thinking about, but maybe it didn't go through the territory he liked, or maybe it didn't have Alcos, or he thought the paint was ugly or something like that. But he went ahead and built a layout that was internally consistent and generally followed some railroad operating procedures. So you can do that. You can also have a collection of oddities where everything on the railroad's a prototype somewhere. There is a prototype for everything, or pretty close. But the question is, are you building a zoo, or are you trying to model an ecosystem? And I think we're trying to model the ecosystem rather than, a couple of pieces of charismatic megafauna. I like this question. This is a great.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So Bill Lane asks a great question. Are there resources that provide the communication verbiage? And again, the Ops Compendium that John has been waving around has a couple of chapters on that. There's also another OPSIG book written by Steve King, not the novelist. He was a B&O dispatcher early in his career, and a GN dispatcher, GN, NP, SPS, guy named Dave Sproul up in the Northwest. Very knowledgeable, very helpful. And they wrote a book called Copy 3, which is make 3 copies of this order, Form 19 West. It's out of print, but again, they are around. And it's a series of examples that tells you how timetable and train order verbiage was done. You know, for more modern stuff, there have been some articles in the dispatcher's office on the proper verbiage for track warrant, direct traffic control, and if you're Canadian, OCS. Or, you know, turn on your scanner and just listen for a while.
Oh, there you go. Dispatcher's office, as in the periodical for OPSIG.
Oh, yeah, sorry, the DO,
yeah. In case someone tuned in later. Something that I would add to that is that was one of the things that I learned when I was starting to get into this whole operations thing, is that some people are pretty casual about it. And I made a very distinct sort of separation between what I would consider casual operations and more formal operations. Like, for example, Silicon Valley lines, right? A lot of the people that are on our chat here have operated on Silicon Valley lines either remotely or in person, as have I. And it's usually pretty relaxed. I mean, you can call the dispatcher and say, hey, I'm at this place, can I go yet? And they're okay with that. Whereas if you're on someone's layout where they are trying to be more formal about it, they may frown on that. So you kind of have to know where you are also, right? To decide how you're going to do that. Someone might even be, well, I was going to say, might even be kind of jerky about it and say, well, you're not asking the right way, so I'm not going to grant you permission to proceed because you're not asking the right question.
I have heard that done. I mean, I wouldn't do that in a newbie session. I generally just try and repeat it back correctly and hope, just learning by listening and doing. I do like the sound of that. You, dispatcher dude, what up?
Can I roll yet? I love the quote.
Xbox 2, proceed from Anna to Clara on the main track. Oakland sub. 2 boxes marked, box 1 and 7.
Move them out.
But yeah, I mean, sure, you can do that.
I thought this was a good question too, actually.
This is really good. Yeah. All right, so the question here is fewer but larger make operations more difficult. You can have longer spurs, but, the other side of that is just do door spots. This car has to go to spot 2, and that car has to go to spot 1. And, when I'm doing an op session, say for the SIG meet, which we'll handle in a sec, generally they'll all be in order or I just won't care. For a more, rigorous session for, say, a bay rails, I would, give them a bunch of cars that are not in order, and the crew might have to sort them out and get them in order, or perhaps have to splice the holds in order. So now, instead of having 5 spots on one spur, you've got 5 separate industries. So, that allows you to make one big industry behave a lot like a couple of smaller ones. The biggest issue I think you have with modern era is the cars tend to be bigger, so you get less play value for a given length of track. And that more of the cars tend to be in pools because, anything that's kind of painted light gray with an X at the end, that's a lesser car. That, that's something like Tilex Trinity Leasing, TILX. Okay, that car is leased to a particular company in a particular service. So, it might be cargo. You'll see a bunch of cargo grain cars going to the elevator, but there might also be a bunch of Tilex cars in there. They needed some more and they rented them for the season. That car doesn't go anywhere except back to wherever that, lessee wants to send them. Whereas in the transition area, you'd have a lot of 40-foot boxcars that are basically, free rollers. Now, you've seen in the modern era those 50-foot, like in the 70s, per diem, incentive per diem cars, and they would be like a rail box, right? And what does it say on the side of rail box? Next load, any road. So that was a pool of boxcars that a bunch of the larger railroads got together to maintain, and they handled the accounting of who paid for what based on how many cars they needed and how long they held them. So that gives you a little more of the free roller. On my layout, out of 150 cars, I think there's a pool of 50 IPD boxes that are the free rollers. Anyway, so we had a couple more questions.
Here was one. There we go. That was the one that was unrelated that I thought you're qualified to at least present an opinion about this, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, LCC was a good solution for some people who were building it. They thought they had a problem. They went out and built this thing. I think the problem was they wanted to build self-configuring modular layouts. I've never seen that actually done. It hasn't had a ton of traction. There's a bunch of reasons for that. One is it tends to be fairly complicated and expensive. There's a tremendous amount of do-it-yourselfers out there, and I could do a whole other clinic on this topic, but it hasn't gotten that much do-it-yourself traction compared to, say, CMRI, which is still alive and very well after 35 years. And I think primarily because it is pretty simple and accessible for people to get in and, make modifications as they want. I think there are some newer things based on Internet of Things, IoT standards, and using a protocol called MQTT. My guess is that will eventually take over. But the reality is there's not that many new signal layouts in any year, a few hundred at most, for a whole bunch of reasons that are probably more time than we want to dedicate today. So, I mean, I think it works. If you have it and you're using it and it works for you, hey, that's great. Do I think it's going to take over? No, not at all. I think it's a minority compared to, the majority systems are people using LocoNet as a layout control bus, CMRI, people still just doing stuff over DCC. Works pretty well for most believable layouts. LCC's there. I think it's a minority standard.
I remember hearing someone say, Seth, and I don't remember where or who it was, but they said something to the effect that LCC was a great solution for a problem that no one has, or something like that, which...
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a cheap shot, but I think
right.
That's true.
Or a solution looking for a problem to solve. I don't remember how it was stated.
A great deal of that. And a friend of mine who's, really done a tremendous amount of work and tried to promote that, with a great deal of standing on his head and, clicking his heels together, has managed to find one case which I would say is an edge case where probably LCC can do it better than anything else. Most of the others, honestly, I mean, I used to configure large telephone systems and data centers for a profession. And, most of these things you can do with anybody's product. As long as you, exclude any obviously strange edge case that was just there to give a particular competitor an advantage in the request for proposal process. So other than some RFP gaming, you could generally do anything you want with anybody's product. And I think that's true of layout control systems. So in the end, the answer is if you are doing the work yourself and you're comfortable with it, great. And, I think 20 or 30% of the signaling systems are built by people who just wanted to build a signaling system, and I could offer them the perfect system out of the box and they wouldn't buy it because they wanted to build it themselves. And that was their hobby.
Exactly. It all comes down to what aspect of the hobby you enjoy. Something similar to that comes up with my model train product spotlights all the time, which is I get something that's really highly super detailed, and then people complain it costs $60. It's like, well, I mean, if you would enjoy super detailing and modifying crude models, and that's how you get your fun, but then by all means pass on this super detailed model. But if you want a super detailed model out of the box, this is a great solution for you, right? So
anyway, so there those sorts of things factor into it. Anyway, I mean, that'd be a great other discussion. I would suggest we get John Plocker, Dave Falkenberg, maybe Bob Jacobson back in here, and we could have a great roundtable about that.
We'll have to make that on the list of possible future episodes of the Crew Lounge, which kind of has gone by the wayside with all the other stuff that we've been doing here on the channel. But yeah, we should definitely maybe remind me later. I'll make a note of that. We can have the people that you mentioned back. I really would like to have John Plocker on sometime, because I know that from listening to you guys talk at the various, whether it's DCC Lunch or Taco Tuesday, that I know that he comes up with really elegant solutions for some of these problems that you're solving. And I think he would be a great person to pick his brain, because he would probably offer all kinds of nuggets of great gold.
Oh, yeah. So do we want to handle this one question here from Late Night and then talk about the SIG meet? Yeah. So the question here is, how do you organize all this paper in the yard, particularly in a large yard? Like, literally, how are they organized? In boxes, piles, or stacks? Yeah, all of the above. If you're using car cards, which I do prefer in yards as a yard master, and I say this, without bragging too much, several hundred, 300-400 somewhere in their sessions as yard master. I like a series of car card pockets or boxes, one for each track and one for each yard industry. And that way, you kind of know what's there. Generally, cars that are where they're going and aren't going to be touched again, I take the car card and turn them around so that they're facing in, and I know I don't need to worry about it. But a great deal of the tracks are transient, arrival departure, sometimes called AD. Rick's layout, the first two sessions, I thought the tracks were numbered 81 through 84, and I was kind of wondering, well, where are the 60s and 70s? But anyway, the arrival departure tracks, I mean, your trick there is trying to keep enough free that any train that shows up that needs to be worked has a place to go, and you've still left one free so that you can move a train around without fouling the main. Then you'll have a series of tracks that are used to break down trains and build up new ones going out. So there's a sorting and classifying thing. So that requires both pockets or little boxes. You can take the Micromark ones or make your own. Those are, they're all reasonable solutions. And then some kind of slot or track that you can set the cards on, probably below layout level, so you're not hitting them as you reach in to pick on the cars and couple and uncouple. If you're using switchless generators, they're a little harder. They don't do a very good job of keeping track of cars being accumulated for future trains. I've seen it done occasionally. The late Richard Cam in Shreveport had a nice scheme for that, where the system would automatically allocate a track a couple of fast hours before the train was due, and you could work on it. I think you're going to end up having to maintain, say, a clipboard with a couple of lists on it to keep track of stuff in a switch list yard. And a lot of people, there's one layout in Colorado Springs, and I'll get off this topic, where what he did is issued a bunch of Scotch tape flags, like you'd, put to mark critical pages in a book you were reading. And you just start putting all the reds for the first local and the oranges for the second local and greens for through trains. And he had some, kind of rainbow-based scheme where, the cooler the color, the more likely it was to be long distance. And, but basically you were now doing card on, tab on car, once it got in the yard, because it was such a pain to deal with the switch list. So somebody may have a better scheme, but that's my experience.
Well, I think some people used to just put all the boxcar red cars at this place and all the green ones over there, and just did it by color of the actual car, so they didn't have to put tabs on them, right?
Oh, well, that was Marlin. Yeah, he would start off that way. So Bakersfield was always black, because it had a lot of oil cars and so on. And it's not as dumb as it sounds. It makes for a quick reset. And in fact, again, in the modern era, black cars are only going to go to certain kinds of places anyway. So while it sounds a little simplistic, it actually is not so unreasonable in practice.
Right. Well, we should probably switch gears then. I don't see a lot of new questions coming in. There's something about, actually, you know what? Here we go. There's one. I'm going to turn my camera off and step away from my computer for a second while you're answering this, Seth.
Sure.
And I will be right back. So please.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, so he's got another question. What do you do with all this stuff for remote ops? And that's a great question. Remote ops is something that people were playing with, but obviously became a lot more important during the pandemic. And, unfortunately, I think some flavor of that's going to be with us for a while to come. Generally, people doing remote ops are not trying to do a lot of switching. Dave Abel is, for example, does a really nice job. His layout is, well set up for remote ops, and he's one of the leaders in the field. Also Silicon Valley Lines, right here in San Jose. What they generally do is run a lot of through trains, because dispatching obviously is done remotely in the real world. Block swaps aren't too bad. You can move a train into a yard and either have the local ground man handle the actual cutting and, making the joints to line the train back up. Individual car switching, I think, is a bridge too far at the moment. Just, the timing and the fact that the couplers aren't super reliable and that there's a little bit of magic in the wrist to uncoupling. So I don't think you can do that. I think you can have a train with a manifest. You can certainly route the train into the yard, but you're going to have a ground man do the switching and reading the cars and making sure they line up with the manifest and that kind of activity in the short term. I'd be delighted if there were some breakthroughs there, but at this point it'd be a little tough.
When using JMRI, how do you capture the car card concept for yards? Do you understand that question?
Yeah, I think the question is, okay, I'm using JMRI, I have all these lists, but now I need to be able to route the cars individually. What JMRI has done a fairly good job, and there are some report formatters that give you some additional flexibility, but everybody I know has like one thing they'd like it to do. So what what they generally get is a list of what's supposed to go on the outbound train and perhaps even the blocking for it. So if you build the train and the cars are in this order, then, you know, life is nirvana for the crew because the cars are all in the right order, and the, you know, in each town, the facing points are together and the trailing points are together and so on. You know, you have a clipboard and you start checking stuff off. I often find if stuff is all over the yard, it's difficult and you end up doing a lot of cherry picking, and that's not an efficient way to run a yard. The problem is none of these reports that I've seen do a very good job of capturing the intermediate sorting stage, which is, you know, I only worry about the next 3 trains, and generally it's, you know, any train within the next 1 or 2 fast hours. And then we're just worried about getting the cars for the Sambone local and the Sambone track, the cars for the Hamilton City local and the Ham City track, the cars for Los Molinos and the, you know, Los Molinos track. And then when I'm really just about done, I cut off the train and, you know, block them, put them in proper order if that's an issue. The real railroad didn't block that much. But the normal technique was the yard was busy, you'd give the local his 30 cars, they'd run 10 miles down the track to a place where there was like an abandoned grain elevator, but the railroad wouldn't tear out all the tracks. So the conductor could go put his train in whatever order he thought made most sense there. Lee Nicholas simulates this on his, what does he call it? Hamilton something. Hamilton Dodger. It's called the Dodger because it gets out on the track and it has to clear up for a bunch of through trains. I think that's one of the best jobs in model railroading on any layout anywhere, because you're totally in control. You get that train, you get out there, you're out by yourself, nobody's bothering you, and you switch your train out, and then you can do whatever you want. So, you know, if you can't do that, you might say, oh, I've got this track and it's full of cars for stuff on the Hamilton branch. Maybe I brought some tape flags if the owner doesn't mind me putting, you know, little Scotch stickies on the cars. I assign different colors to different industries, and then, you know, get all the reds together, all the blues together, and so forth. As I say, Dave, I'm having a blank on his last name. Good guy, more or less Colorado Springs or Castle Rock, used to be on the OPSIG board with me. I feel terrible here. He and his wife have this amazing layout, and that's the way they handled their yard. It worked fine.
Yeah. There is, oh, here we go. The upcoming SIG meet.
Oh, wow. Yes.
That, right?
Yes.
Seth, what in the world is a SIG meet anyway? What is
Okay. Well, okay, a SIG is a special interest group, and in model railroading, the more prominent SIGs are the layout design SIG and the OPSIG, and I've had long connections with both. They're both great organizations. We've talked about what OPSIG does, and layout design basically does the same sort of thing for layouts. You know, the idea is to help you design a layout. The informal tagline is make only new mistakes. So, you know, we encourage you to go out there and be creative, lots of freedom to fail. But here's a bunch of stuff we know already doesn't work. So don't waste a lot of time on that and move on. So we hold a day of clinics and panels talking about various operations and layout design topics. And Sid has the link up there, and we should have a sign-up page fairly shortly. We're trying something a little new this year, being obviously we had to be virtual last year. And we're hoping, barring a great big surge, that we will be hybrid this year, which means we'll have room for up to 70 guests in the Santa Clara Depot. And you want to sign up and reserve your space if you're interested in attending live. And we will ask that everybody be vaxxed en masse. So if you're not comfortable with that, or just feel you'd probably rather not have that much of a close encounter at this point. We'll also be offering it as a Zoom meet. And I believe we'll also be handling a live stream. So you have lots of opportunities.
Yeah.
As I say, 4 clinics, a panel, a layout design challenge, and we'll have there's information on the site about the challenge, so you can accept the challenge and submit a design. And we'll have a panel of the 4 or 5 best designs, and then we'll have some remote layout tours on Saturday, the 5th of February, and the main meet will be Sunday, the 6th. So this is a little bit of a change for us. Used to be the main show was on Saturday, but we're back in the depot. But in order to keep the numbers correct and be able to provide some compliance with meeting regulations, we've gone to Sunday, so we have the depot to ourselves. So we're very much looking forward to seeing some of you live, but there will also be opportunities to tune in, as it will, remotely and participate. We'll be monitoring the chat stream. We'll have Clinic Goes On like we did at the Sugar Pine meet and the Rails by the Bay last summer. So we're going to, try and do the best we can, learn how to do hybrid meets, and really want to see you all again.
I think that it's worth mentioning that what this should end up looking like. And I think what we're planning right now is to have Saturday, like Seth mentioned, that's going to be all virtual. There's not going to be an in-person segment for Saturday, because frankly, it would be kind of hard to get people to allow strangers into their layouts, because a lot of people are not having people in their homes right now for obvious reasons. So that's going to be all virtual, and it's going to be done as a Zoom meeting, basically. But in addition to that, you could be a fly on the wall by watching it stream live here on this channel. This is the plan right now. We're going to stream it live. And of course, the benefit to signing up is that you get to be there and have interaction with everybody else, including asking questions. I believe, I don't know, so maybe you can tell me, Seth, because I'm not as in tune with Saturday. Are there going to be Clinic Goes On sessions for those as well?
Yes,
Saturday?
I believe we're going to try to do that. Okay. So David Parks has been doing some great work. He's kind of been our host liaison person forever, but we're going to have some remote hosts, so it'll probably come out a little differently. But as I said, it's going to be a learning experience, and but we have high expectations.
Yeah. The important thing to know, though, for people who are considering whether they would want to sign up or just kind of watch it as a fly on the wall here on the channel, for free, is that Clinic Goes On is basically an additional session that will only be available to signed up participants, and it's a separate room known as a breakout room in the Zoom meeting, where you can go and interact directly with other people, and in this case, just say, for example, a layout owner, to ask questions about how they did stuff or why they did stuff, what their approach was. The people who are watching as a fly on the wall on YouTube won't get that. They'll just get the main presentation. And then the same thing will happen for Sunday. We're going to have the in-person, as Seth mentioned, with the requirements that he mentioned, vaccinated and masked, or whatever the health, in addition to whatever the health department dictates, right? Because we have a county health department who's basically in control of what happens at the depot with respect to how people come together there. So we have to follow their guidelines. The other thing, so that's the in-person one, and we're going to have live Q&A like you would have in any in-person meeting like that. The virtual people are going to get the live presentation, as it were, in a Zoom meeting, and then have another opportunity for Clinic Goes On in the Zoom meeting. So again, people who are attending virtually get a lot of value in the whole proposition. And then for the people who want to watch again, I'm going to call it fly on the wall, because you don't get to ask questions. on YouTube, it'll be on this channel, and you can just watch what happens in the live room. But again, unfortunately for people who are not signed up, there won't be any opportunity for additional interaction with clinic goes on or just hanging out with other friends in the breakout rooms. Of course, we will have our chat running here on a stream, so you can interact with each other on YouTube. You just don't get the additional benefit of being able to ask questions of the people presenting and such. It's just going to be a streamed out of Zoom basically. So I'm really excited about it, Seth, because I don't know that anybody has done a hybrid to this level. I mean, we're even bringing in remote presenters, which is it's a complication, but not one that we can't handle. And I think it can really open up the accessibility of the hobby to a lot of different people by not limiting to whoever's proximate to where the meet is being held. Bring in someone from Canada. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be recording with someone from Canada, I think next week or sometime in the near future. So, oh, and here's another benefit. No pants required for the YouTube or the Zoom event. You just have to make sure you have your camera up the whole time. So you don't have to be embarrassed like if I were there, or you don't have to show off.
Also, we don't need to see your bunny slippers.
Oh, okay. That's where it would go straight to the slippers. Yeah. Anyway, I'm really excited though, because this is a way to leverage the technology that's really available to everybody to make the event and the hobby and everything that we're trying to provide way more accessible. I mean, you could be anywhere in the world. If you have an internet connection, you can attend this SIG meet. So I'm excited.
Yeah, we absolutely are. Yeah, you should be. We had some wonderful people who'd never been able to attend because of distance and a bunch of other factors who joined us last year, and we're really excited about having them join us again this year, as well as our usual folks. And honestly, we always had a substantial contingent that came over the hill from Reno or even down from Southern Oregon. And, depending on the weather, happily, cross our fingers, we're having some rain this winter, but that kept some of our friends away because, just couldn't get over the passes. Yep. So we really look forward to seeing them zoom in if they can't drive in. And I'm not sure. Would we rather have 2 inches of rain or all of our buddies?
Well,
there's a pretty good trade-off.
There's a couple ways to look at that too. I mean, the other thing to think about, and I think you alluded to this a minute ago, is what if someone really is immunocompromised and doesn't want to take any risks at all?
Yes.
Well, that's fine. Attend virtually. Even if you're local, attend virtually if you're not comfortable getting into a meeting with a bunch of people sitting there. Because, I mean, I have to admit, Seth, I'm fully vaccinated I had my booster last week, some Thursday, a week ago, this past Thursday, and I'm still a little, I don't know, paranoid, I guess, about going into places where there's a lot of people, because you don't know who they are and you don't know what the next variant's going to be or how deadly it's going to be. So there are people that have legit reasons for not wanting to be there. There are some other people who just don't want to wear a mask. It's fine. You're welcome to. Just join us virtually. I think it's awesome. I mean, it's as inclusive as you can get. And
yeah, absolutely.
From talking to me for the past several years that's something that I am really all about. I mean, that's what this channel is all about. Be as inclusive as possible. So anyway, is there anything else we should talk about before we go, or should we wrap this? And we've been going a little longer than actually we've been going a little longer than I thought we would, but what do you think? Anybody else? Anything else you want to mention, Seth?
Oh, no, I think we're good.
Cool.
I'm sure John will be happy to take any suggestions or comments if there's any of this that people would like to take a deeper dive on, or some of the other ops topics.
Sure.
I can come back, or we can find some suitable subject matter expert and take it a little further.
Yeah, we could even do another one of the what did I call it? The Crew Lounge episodes at some point. I really enjoy those, and I like having multiple experts on at a time, so that it just seems like it's a more in-depth conversation usually. If you have a few people that really know what they're talking about, because they'll think of things that you or I just wasn't on our mind, that could be a very interesting sort of tangential topic to cover. So I do want to thank you, Seth, for taking the time to be here today. It's always good to be able to pick your brain about this stuff. And I think that, I don't know, another topic I would love to cover someday is something about how to get involved with operations. The SIG meet actually would be one of those opportunities for someone who isn't involved with ops and wants to learn, because I know that under normal circumstances where we would have an in-person SIG meet, that's what Saturday is. It's getting people involved into operations on the various layouts. Or was that on Sunday night? I don't remember, but the point is that there's an opportunity for that, where people who have operating or operations oriented layouts will bring people in and not have a super hardcore, using the correct terminology and reading it back 3 times or whatever requirements. That would be a great topic to cover someday. How does someone get into operations with their local operating groups? And
exactly. I mean, the thing is, this was a nice way for people to just sign up and get to run on an operating layout in a session that was designed for them to be comfortable, freedom to fail, that kind of idea. Not to say that you couldn't meet people, and if you reach out, we wouldn't be able to find you a session, but this is really easy, and you don't have to do that much. Just sign up for the meet, and then sign up for ops when the ops requests come out. So that's a really good way to get started.
I think it would be great to have a panel discussion about that and things like etiquette. How do you make sure you get invited back?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't fart too much, probably in crowded areas.
Yeah, probably, go easy on the burritos at lunch. Try not to handle the equipment too much. Clean up after yourself in the bathroom.
Don't pick up the locomotives. Anyway, all right. So, like I was starting to say, Seth, thank you for your time and your information. It's greatly appreciated. I'm sure that people watching got a lot of great information from your presentation. And I also want to thank our chat moderators who keep things on topic in the chat, as well as I think we had at least one super chat from Andy. Thank you very much. If there was one I missed, thanks everybody really for watching and making this content possible. And I always get to this point and I realize I have to play this video, and I'm caught flat-footed because the video has to be clicked around to. So everybody, this coming Saturday, a week from today, we're going to have the next episode of Model Railroading with Jack Burgess. And I want to wish everybody a happy Christmas and happy New Year and all that other stuff, because we won't be live again until sometime next year. So thank you.